Hello and welcome to Noble Mind.
Noble Mind is a podcast exploring mindfulness, meditation, and psychology. Hello, listeners. In this episode, Ruth Williamson shares about how we can activate a sense of purpose that brings us more fully alive, as well as how to participate in the world with greater compassion. She shares her insights as a Buddhist chaplain-in-training and what she has learned through social justice ministry work with individuals experiencing houselessness. Ruth Williamson is a trained teacher of mindfulness and self-compassion, as well as a life and leadership coach. She trained at the Hudson Institute of Coaching and teaches the leadership curricula of Dr. Brené Brown. She has worked deeply in community, nonprofit, government, and business sectors for over 25 years. Ruth is currently a chaplain in training with the Upaya Zen Institute and engaged in social justice ministry addressing houselessness.
If you're a fan of Noble Mind, we would love for you to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or LinkedIn, and come join our free Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/noblemind. And as always, you can learn about events, get our show notes, and join our email list by going to noblemindpodcast.com. Enjoy this episode. We're here with Ruth Williamson. Welcome, and thanks so much for joining us here on Noble Mind. Perhaps you can start us off by introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about who you are.
Yeah, I'm a leadership and life coach. I'm based in Bend, Oregon. I do kind of organizational consulting around leadership development, primarily using the curriculum of Brené Brown. I teach and facilitate for the Center for Mindfulness and Self Compassion out of UCSD. So I lead weekly circle of practice that's grounded in the MSC, the Mindfulness and Self Compassion work of Kristen Neff and Chris Germer. And I'm also fortunate to work alongside of a colleague and good friend, Amy Eckhart, and we lead an 8-month-long community of deepening practice, which is kind of a deep dive into the curriculum and kind of expanding it beyond just narrowness of the initial offering. And deep dive it is. We get to a lot of incredible terrain that is within each of us. And then I'm also a chaplain in training with the Upaya Zen Center down in Santa Fe. I'm a student of Roshi Joan Halifax's, and our practice is a Zen tradition. And I've taken my lay vows, so that's just making a personal commitment to live by vow. And I'm about to write a thesis as part of my chaplaincy, which is very daunting for an older student like myself. My thesis work centers around the houseless community and the causes and conditions that are putting so many out on the margins of our communities across the country. Sort of understanding who's there and then considering what a compassionate response looks like and how we might enact that. And especially, how to kind of turn the conversation around from the houseless are the problem and they are the other to what do we have to learn about being in community in the ways that we welcome the unhoused home. So that's a little bit about what I'm paying attention to these days.
Thank you.
For those of us who are not familiar with chaplaincy, could you provide an overview and what it means to be a Buddhist chaplain in particular?
Yeah. Typically, we find Buddhist chaplains serving in healthcare settings alongside of more traditional Christian ministries, helping people in hospice situations, helping people deal with chronic illness, that type of a thing, and just basically accompanying them with a spiritual orientation. The ministry I've chosen is what they would call social justice ministry. So I'm paying attention more to service, as I've mentioned earlier, to our houseless community. And this is an important aspect of chaplaincy, not necessarily to fix a problem that is so complex and has frankly always been with us as suffering is, but to understand it deeply and to develop my personal capacity to hold suffering and work with it skillfully versus just turning away from suffering. And I think that's where a mindfulness practice and we can slash that alongside of a meditation practice, which is the centerpiece of most Buddhist traditions. All Buddhist traditions really sit. Helps us develop a capacity then to be in fraught circumstances and be alongside of suffering and be of service, to sometimes just to witness as much as anything else. So my chaplaincy has developed me, I think personally, it's certainly deepened my Buddhist study and my meditation practice, but it's also asked me then to bring that into the world in the ways that build off of my history. I'm a woman of a certain age. I've done a lot of work, and that was one of my early questions is, if not as a healthcare provider or in that setting, what is it that I'm uniquely oriented to? And I've done a lot of work in my community. I've served in a lot of different roles. So that sort of became my platform to build upon. There's always this personal lineage thread too. What brought you to the moment, and how might you bring that life wisdom, if you will, that life experience forward in service? So that's a little bit about the chaplaincy. It's hard. It's the hardest thing I have ever done.
Wow.
Bar none.
I'd love to hear a little more about that. In particular, I think probably myself, many of our listeners maybe have encountered chaplaincy in a general sense, maybe in a healthcare setting or hospice, as you're saying. Mm-hmm. Maybe you could tell us a little bit more about what the idea of social justice ministry is or means, or what that specific angle might look like, or how that might be different.
Well, I think the inquiry is, what am I uniquely here to offer? I think of it as like, what is moving through me when I get out of my own way, when my practice allows me to settle and to kind of rest my constructed sense of myself? What do I notice? What am I called to do? Because we all, I believe, have there's a purpose in our lives. And in fact, purposefulness is very enlivening. So when I work with people in a coaching capacity, a lot of times we're trying to activate that sense of purpose. Why are you here? What is it that brings you alive? And it becomes sort of a generative loop, if you will. The thing that you do, you can't not do. And the thing that you do feeds you, and then you feed it. And it kind of goes like that. And chaplaincy in a social justice context could look like advocacy. It could be activism. It probably always will include some form of that, because once you become aware of some of the issues that confront so many in our country and around our globe that struggle, you can't not care. But some of us are spokespeople. Some of us do very simple service. Some of us just feed the hungry. Mother Teresa, she had a social justice ministry, if you will, and she had an incredible spaciousness of heart and a wisdom and an ability to serve very humbly, and in so doing, though, attracted a lot of awareness to the conditions that many in her country of India live within. So it can take on a lot of different forms. I wouldn't say it's a prescriptive ministry, but at least from my experience, you find your way. And some of that way unfolds in very unlikely forms. But that's part of dropping our ego and just noticing what's happening.
It reminds me of that quote about where your passions and the needs of the world intersect, there you'll find your calling, something like that. Because it sounds like you're saying really very deeply connected to you and what's the work you can't not do, or what are the causes that you care a lot about, but then engaging in that activism or engagement to try to improve those areas of challenge in the world, but from a very spiritual and personal place.
Absolutely, Kate. Yeah. I think there's an aspect of mindfulness and meditation that gives us a facility. This is, again, my experience. Others have different experiences. And this is also being a bodhisattva in the world, if you will, somebody who is enacting compassion. So if you're sitting in a cave, if you're not participating in the world, your practice would look and unfold very differently. But if you're constantly confronted with the challenges that many of us face, being bodhisattvas, if you will, in the world, there's a certain amount of letting things unfold, letting life work its way into you, and through you. And in order to do that, you have to constantly relinquish the preconceived notions of who you are and why you do what you do for any other reasons than simply because you can. So humility is a really useful place to stand. I don't know. I don't know. In fact, the Buddhists have the three tenets. They're really core to the precepts. They anchor the precepts. Roshi Bernie Glassman wrote and talked about this a lot, and so does my teacher, Roshi Joan Halifax, because she's of the Zen peacemaker tradition that Bernie established. I think she's a co-founder. The first tenet is not knowing, not knowing,
Well, that's a life's work.
knowing you don't know. Just embracing what is with absolutely fresh eyes and setting aside your biases, your preconceived notions, the whole of it, and sitting in that discomfort of not knowing, which can be really challenging for people, and then bearing witness to what it is that you notice when you don't put a story upon what it is that you're witnessing. And you toggle between these two places for a long, long time. And only then might skillful action, right action, the third tenet, emerge. I lean on those a lot in my work with the houseless community as I consider this ministry and writing about it. It's going to be a very emergent experience to write a big thesis around this, and I don't know quite yet what it's going to look like, but I'm sure I'm not the first person that's described writing that way.
I'm intrigued by what you're teaching and modeling. I tend to think most contemporary people as being disconnected, having difficulty finding meaning, perhaps being overwhelmed by the difficulties of the world instead of being able to bear witness, be with, and so on. So I'm intrigued by that.
The world is overwhelming.
Right. Yeah.
It is. It's coming at us really fast, really hard with a lot of suffering. This moment that we're living now is really challenging for people. And it shows up, going back to some of the work I do within organizations, people are really struggling. Even within the confines of organizational structure. And this is my job, and I just go do my job. It is impossible to disconnect from just the felt experience of dis-ease and dissonance that we live with. And that causes dysregulation. It also reactivates old traumas, big T's, little T's. People bring their whole selves to work. So all of this shows up. They also bring it home, and they might bring the challenges that they are facing at home with their children or with their partners into the workplace. It manifests there. One of the things I think is really interesting working alongside those experiencing houselessness is that they are us. And I mean that very literally. When you start to pull apart the stories, what you find here is a population that mirrors everything that we would characterize our larger population as. Their mothers, their daughters, their fathers, their sons. There's mental illness. There is addiction, absolutely. Drugs are a huge, huge part of the problem, but they are not necessarily characteristic of all the people that are on the streets. There's domestic violence. There's people that have lost their jobs. There's people that have been priced out of the community that they grew up in. They can't afford. Their wages aren't sufficient to afford a home if they could find a place to live. That's who's on the sidelines. And why is it that we tend to not want to deal with that is really interesting question. And I believe from the research that I've done and just the interaction that I've had, which again, I wouldn't characterize myself as an expert at all, but we turn away from that suffering because it's our suffering. We're part of those same systems. And it's that close, it's so close. These are tough times to be on the planet Earth without easy fixes and without clear leadership, without directives that we really need to suggest that, gosh, we're going to get our hands around climate change. We're going to come together and save the planet. We're going to figure out how to heal the social divides in our country and globally. We're going to figure out how to work skillfully with challenges that we've never faced before. I heard a statistic recently. We just reached 8 billion people on the planet, and we will be 10.5 billion. 10.5 billion people on the planet in 60 years. That'll be, my children will still be alive. If they have children, their children will definitely be coming in. So if you think our urban environments, which is where most people live, are intense and difficult now with the stressors of living in a dense, concrete space, it's going to get worse. So why do we practice?
Yes.
Why do we practice?
Yeah.
It takes tremendous courage to turn towards all of that and hold it and not have it knock you to your knees in tears.
Yeah.
And sometimes it just does that anyhow.
It's so easy, especially with the media, to be so overwhelmed by so much going on and end up in this kind of paralysis of feeling like either you can't do anything or what little you can do is not going to be enough. Because when you see like the world crashing down in like 10 different places, even if you could make a small difference locally and on some specific topic, we're so flooded every day with the scope and scale of global struggle and destruction. It's very hard to feel like that's enough. But of course, if nobody does anything, then things just keep getting worse. But yeah, it's and I think that's maybe where a spiritual perspective or a connection to something like what you're describing can really make a difference.
The poet David White, he has a beautiful, I want to say seminal work called Start Close In. It's a beautiful poem. Start close in, don't take the second step, take the first step, the step you don't want to take. And this idea is something that I find really useful when I'm working again with clients and stuff who come in and everything's just a big hairball. Yeah. And it's like, God, where do I begin? And I mean, you could use that descriptor for the world today and all the causes and conditions that are colliding and the systems that are failing. And the Buddhists are fond of pointing to the interrelationality of all things. We inter-are, Thich Nhat Hanh would say. We inter-are. Starting close in is essential. I can only really impact myself first, right? This is where the work is. And I have to do my own work. And only then do I have really anything of value to offer to the next ring out, those intimate relationships that I'm in. I have nothing genuine to give in those relationships that matter most to me until I've at least given it to myself. So the practice of self-compassion, self-kindness, cultivating that, even though it seems counterintuitive to a lot of us with sort of the Western Christian framework of, that's a selfish stance. So we tend to not want to do that. We want to self-deny. But starting close in on myself changes my immediate system, and my immediate system then ripples out into the larger system that I'm a part of, my community. And my community, and I talk about this a lot when I do community work here in Bend, Oregon, why not be that little town in Oregon that got its hands around the houseless situation, which is across the country, and approached it differently? What if we just were that community that met this moment with a compassionate, open embrace and worked skillfully from that place? How might that inspire other communities to do the same instead of criminalizing people who are living outside because they have no place else to go?
Could you tell us more about your work with people experiencing houselessness?
They're people, I mean, I do very simple service every week. I sit with a group of men generally. Again, it's just sort of what's evolved. We do, I sit in a circle with them, and we have a process called self-evaluation where as part of this program, it's a Christian ministry, Shepherd's House here in Bend, Oregon. As part of the program, they have to evaluate themselves. It's a very intimate disclosure of what was going on for me, what were my thoughts, what was going on for me underneath the behavior, right? And I have been so touched by these self-eval circles that I thought, gosh, these guys are the best coaches I've ever heard. I mean, these questions are penetrating and spot on. I mean, way better than I feel like I ever offer in a paid client session. And so I sit with them and I hold space together. And I actually raised my hand last week and I said, I think I'm ready to do a self-eval. That's after a year, right? And you would think I would go pick me. I'll self-disclose. But the depth and the rawness of these stories of what put these people out on the streets and into addiction, the things that the generational trauma that they carry forward, their circumstances as a child, as a youth. I mean, you can't believe it. You just can't even imagine. I couldn't. It's multiple traumas. It's multiple failings of our society that just drops people to the sidelines. Then I go out and I work with a wonderful, wise, I've had the blessing of some great mentors in this space, but I've been working with something we call Project Share. And it's a van and it's stocked with food that's, you can open easily and heat easily. And sometimes we have fresh fruit and fresh bread, but mostly we have canned things. And then we have, in the winter we have coats and hats and that type of thing. And in the summer we have, shoes that you can wear into the water, and whatever we have for donations, we bring them forward. But the thing that's interesting about that, and the share van goes out into the camps. We go generally meet people where they are. The instruction that I've had, and that's been a real powerful teaching for me, is not to sit there in the van and say, what do you need? Right? Or, I've got something that you need. We don't do that. We greet people. How are you? How's it going? Hi, Michelle. Hi, Daryl. Good to see you. How you been? We build trust, and we build a relationship. If they need something and we've got it, it's theirs. But we let them have the dignity of asking, and we don't assume what they need. We don't assume anything, and it is a patient practice, but it's a beautiful thing to see trust just kind of flower. I had a young woman the other day who, I could go on and describe her circumstances. I don't think she's well in the head, let's just say that. And she's a young girl. She's in her 20s, and she's got these two little dogs. And sometimes it's hard to watch because I judge, like, you don't know how to take care of your dogs. You're not being kind to your dogs. It's hot or whatever. I don't say anything, but I noticed that she was coming and sitting on the fender of the van. She felt safe enough just to sit in close. And some people come in and they shop like they're at Nordstrom, It's so funny. No, I don't want that. Nah, I don't want that. This whole thing that we do together. But it's beautiful in its way. And you just let those guys take the lead.
Well, and you're putting humanity first.
100%, Kate. 100%.
Yeah. Which is so healing, just to be seen as a fellow traveler, a fellow human being, a peer, as you're saying, not just an object to sort of gratify your own desire to be helpful or something.
So much. Yeah. Oh gosh, no. Yeah. But that's a little seduction that can slip in, You can start to think I work with this energy all the time. I've got this Joan of Arc complex. I was going to go out and save the world. I'm going to save Bend, Oregon. And I go, stop it, Ruth. That is not why you're here. That is not why you're here. And if you're here for that reason, you need to check in with that. That's not okay.
Yeah.
We're just fellow journeyers.
Yeah.
And I am, my skin color is white. I grew up in an affluent neighborhood. My family wasn't by any, I had the experience of feeling not enough on the outside, on the wrong side of the fence, because the neighborhood we were a part of seemed like everybody else had more than I did, or our family. But nevertheless, by virtue of that proximity and education and the color of my skin, I have lived a very different life than somebody who is of color, of different ethnicity, maybe who doesn't grow up in a neighborhood. Period. I mean, we seem to create community wherever we go, but some of that is, what if your community is drug dealers and really dark circumstances? That's what you live alongside of and grow up in. So it's just kind of getting clear on how did I get here, and maybe asking why then? Why and why not? Why not try to participate in the world with compassion?
Yeah.
What else am I going to do?
You're using the term houseless as opposed to the more usual homeless. Could you say more about that? Yeah.
The idea is that we're always home. We're always home in ourselves, ideally. My home is not the roof over my head. My home is myself. And so we're making a judgment, even subtle, when we label somebody homeless, that, that their home might look very different. Their home probably does look different. It's probably a tarp over a torn tent with a broken tent pole. And the reason it's in that condition is because they've been asked to leave a number of different encampments, and things get damaged, But the point being that that's somebody's house, I should say, and that looks different than my house. And they're living in that circumstance because they don't have the privilege of a roof over their head in this moment, and all the safety and stability that a house provides. So one of the most successful strategies in addressing the urgency of our swelling houseless community has been to prioritize housing, to get people into transitional housing as part of a strategic process of moving them back into their own house, which might be an apartment or whatever, providing the safety and stability of your own space. And let me underscore safety, and let me underscore stability. Can't work on any mental health issues I might have, addiction I might be challenged with, getting identification, possibly getting some training. I can't do any of that if all I'm doing is trying to survive. So that's the idea, that we don't label them as homeless because that has a stereotype attached to it, and it misses the multifaceted population that have found themselves without a house, housing insecure.
Interesting. Rick Hansen talks about chronic inner homelessness.
For
so
sure.
It seems to separate the problem into homelessness versus houselessness.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah, I like that, sort of teasing out houselessness and homelessness, and that also, I don't know, in some ways makes the topic something that we can have our own self-inquiry around as well, in terms of, okay, I do have this roof over my head. I have a certain amount of stability and security, as you say. Do I have a feeling of home? And what does that take and what's needed for that? So there's actually kind of two processes going on that kind of get mushed together, maybe when people don't separate it out, as you're saying. I'd love to go back to what you said a few minutes ago when you were talking about working with this group, and you were describing doing, was it a self-evaluation, right? Could you just say a couple words? I was intrigued about what a self-evaluation looks like, or what that process is.
There's a form. It says, what am I considering? This is before. What was I considering doing? What do I want? What am I thinking? If I continue with what I'm doing, what will be the results of my choice, etc. I believe they're trying to create avenues for self-awareness because so often we react, and we don't even know what is triggered in us that is driving the strong emotions that accompany our behavior. So this is an inquiry into what was going on for me in this moment. So you can start to recognize the patterns. And then you have self-evaluation after. What did I choose to do? What did I want? What was I thinking? What were the results of my choice? What effect did my choice have on the environment? If it's a Christian ministry, they bring about 45 men and a dozen or so women into a separate facility. They don't bring them in. They choose to come in. Let's just say they're tired, they're worn out, they're ready to do the work. They agree to sobriety. They agree to working with a case manager. They agree to trying to get their lives on track. And this is a way for them to kind of own their process. And then as we sit in circle, we listen, and then we can ask questions. But we have to ask the participants if we can ask questions. And we can't, they're not opportunities to fix or tell people what to do. There's sincere inquiry into so what was that about for you, and how do you feel talking about it now, and what other insights have you gained, etc. So it's raw. Like I said, I've sat there and gone, oh my goodness, I cannot believe this person is able to be here, is sitting here before me, and how hard they have worked. Let me just say, harder than I've ever worked on any issue that I have found myself challenged by. I mean, we're talking about raw courage.
When I look within in this moment, I can sense the fear and judgment around homelessness or houselessness. I can sense I don't want to be part of that group. That fear and judgment is really about me.
Yeah.
So this is very odd, but I almost feel there's a comfort to othering, like it's behind the wall. This problem is I don't have to worry about.
Maybe unpack that a little bit further.
In the sense that, I mean, it's such a frightening prospect to fall into such dire straits. And that's not me, that's people much worse off than me. It's comforting because then at least I'm safe.
Yeah. At least I'm safe.
It's an illusion. It's a defense mechanism.
It's absolutely a defense mechanism, and it reifies our sense of ourself in some way that is better than. I'm not pointing the finger at you. I'm pointing all the fingers at me,
Right.
Brené Brown talks about 3 irreducible needs that every human being on the planet, regardless of where you are and how you grow up, 3 irreducible needs. We all need love, we all need safety, and we all need to feel like we belong. And when any one of those things are absent, we really, really struggle. I find that is often in my mind when I'm working not just with the community of people that find themselves without a house, although it's fascinating to observe that when you create safety, when you convey love, which is it's just compassion. Compassion is love in action. You'll always see community happen, no matter what. It just forms itself, and it's a beautiful thing. And I'm a big fan of community, and we talk about that a lot in our circle of practice on Tuesdays. I just love the Sangha. And in Buddhism, of course, you have the Buddha, the Dharma, the teachings, and the Sangha is the community. So when I pay attention to why do many of us tend to look away or other or demonize or subordinate this population, what is being challenged for us that we're What of those irreducible needs is not being met in our own lives? Do we not feel safe? Do we not feel loved? Do we not love ourselves? What's our community like? What's happening there? And how does that start to fuel the scarcity that makes people believe like, well, I don't have much, but I got more than that guy. That guy's a piece of doo-doo, and I'm better than him because at least I've got, I pulled myself up by my bootstraps, blah, blah, blah. All the stories then that kind of reify the sense of ourselves, because on some level, I think, there but for the grace of God, go I. And how are those basic components of our humanity at risk or undeveloped or not getting nurtured? Because I think that's a big driver. I hope that's not too obtuse. When I reflect on why is our country so divided right now, and why the overt racism and overt oppression of women and overt disregard for the environment, absolutely ignoring the climate crisis. I think it's because people are struggling so much and going so fast and so hard that they don't even have time to reflect that I am struggling, I am suffering. And if we can't own our own suffering, we don't have a capacity to hold the suffering of others. So you see, it all just kind of goes back on itself. The story is always very simple.
Yeah, this tendency to, when we're not kind of taking care of ourselves or struggling somehow in ourselves and trying to avoid that, then we end up relating to the world in different ways, pushing things away that might raise awareness, as you're saying, of things we haven't yet resolved within ourselves, trying to construct some story that keeps us feeling better than someone rather than look inside and do that work on our own. So it's really rich, this way of connecting this work in the world with our own inner dynamics as well.
I'm too busy to care. I'm too overwhelmed to care. I have enough problems of my own.
Right.
Don't ask me to take on anybody else's problems. And so the fortress gets built, and we feel like we're taking care of ourselves, but we're really cutting ourselves off.
And we may actually find healing and something improves if we interact with other people, as you're saying, and describing your own growth from this engagement that you've been doing.
Very much.
If people have been enjoying this conversation and want to hear a little bit more about you, your work, where can they find you?
They can find me at Ruth Williamson Consulting, which was such an awkward name because it's my name. But yeah, RuthWilliamsonConsulting.com.
Right. You're a person and a website.
I am both.
Anything else you'd like to say or ideas to offer our audience before we wrap up?
I just appreciate this attention to mindfulness as a practice of humanity. I'm at a point in my life now. I mean, I've been practicing for a long time, but my chaplaincy has really asked me to recommit to and deepen my practice. It has absolutely carried me forward in my life. I'm still the hot mess I've always been. So if you are looking for mindfulness, personal transformation pathway is probably not your best choice. But it has allowed me to embrace more of life. And in embracing more of life, I hope I can be of service in small ways. That's a gift back to me. It's like when you give a gift, you know how it feels? It feels wonderful to give a gift to somebody, a personal gift, something that you really treasure. And what could be more intimate and special than yourself? Even if the self is messy, at least you're showing up with that.
Lovely. Seems like a very nice note to end on. Thank you so much, Ruth. This conversation's been lovely. Much appreciated.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for the interest. And Alex, thank you for the invitation. And Kate, really lovely to spend time with you too.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening today.
If you enjoyed this episode, we hope you'll hit subscribe, leave us a great rating or review, and spread the word. You can also go to noblemindpodcast.com to join our email list. You'll get a weekly behind-the-scenes message, news, announcements, and other special goodies we come up with just for you. Thanks for listening, and bye for now.